BBC said Disney's Snow White has a major identity crisis. I mean, guys, every single one of these reviews is just absolutely brutal. And what you also need to know is that these are not politically driven reviews. I mean, most of them are from the camp that should be supporting Disney, that should be behind this new progressive take on Snow White.
Disney has long been the undisputed king of family entertainment, with a nearly century-long reputation for creating magical stories that resonate across generations. From the early days of hand-drawn animation to the modern era of billion-dollar franchises, the company has maintained its position at the top of the entertainment industry through careful brand management and an uncanny ability to give audiences exactly what they want.
A cartoon character that was voiced in the 30s has more humanity and charm than the actual person who was filmed on screen in live action. That's a problem.
However, the release of Snow White in 2024 marked a shocking turning point. Not just another mediocre remake in Disney's increasingly criticized live-action lineup, but a full-blown cultural and financial catastrophe that exposed deep flaws in the company's modern approach to storytelling. The problems began with what should have been a routine casting announcement, when Disney revealed that Rachel Zegler, the young star of West Side Story, would play Snow White in their upcoming.
I just have to note the smugness and superiority on this 23, 25, something like that, girl's face. Young, a little bit of humility, you know? This is a story that's been around for a long, long time. You're not improving on it.
Live-action remake. The initial reaction was cautiously optimistic. Zegler possessed the vocal chops and screen presence that made her seem like a natural fit for Disney's princess lineup. However, the first warning signs appeared almost immediately when Zegler began giving interviews that seemed to openly disparage the source material. In multiple press appearances, she referred to the original 1937 animated classic as extremely dated.
So they took out the famous theme song, "Someday My Prince Will Come," because it's not fair for a woman to live for love or want to find love or want to find a prince. They were not going to do that anymore, and they replaced it with the far more catchy song, this typical girl power anthem.
Criticized Prince Charming's behavior as borderline stalker-ish, and made it clear that this would be a radical reimagining rather than a faithful adaptation. This approach immediately alienated the film's built-in audience. Disney's live-action remakes have always depended on nostalgia as their primary selling point, the promise of seeing beloved childhood stories brought to life with modern technology.
Greatest Disney box office bomb in the history, Disney live-action remakes, but certainly also the end of her career.
By positioning their new version as a corrective to the original, rather than a celebration of it, the filmmakers made a critical miscalculation. Social media erupted with outrage from longtime Disney fans who saw these comments as disrespectful to the studio's legacy. The controversy only grew when details emerged about the creative changes being made to the story. Gone was the central romance between Snow White and her prince, replaced with what the filmmakers described as a more empowered narrative.
Disney threw her under the bus, but I mean, not unjustifiably so. You can't be like, Rachel Zegler's innocent in all this. She did no damage to the box office. We're seeing it because of her.
The Seven Dwarfs were reportedly being reimagined as a diverse group of magical creatures to avoid stereotypes. When Snow White was released in March 2024, it performed extremely poorly at the box office. The film only made $43 million in its opening weekend in the United States. This was much lower than expected for a Disney movie of this size. Other Disney remakes that people had criticized, like The Little Mermaid from 2023, still made about $95 million in their first weekend. After the first weekend,
TLDR, the girls and the gays, we all want a man, we all dream about true love, so Disney, that is not outdated.
things got worse. The movie's ticket sales dropped by 66% in its second weekend. This showed that people who saw it weren't telling their friends to go see it. The international numbers were also very bad. The movie only made about $90 million worldwide, even though it cost $270 million to make. When you add in the money spent on advertising, which was about $150 million, the total loss for Disney was probably more than $300 million. This made it one of the biggest money-losing movies Disney has ever made. The critical reception was equally brutal. Reviewers savaged the film's confused tone.
Also, there's nothing wrong with wanting a man. Can we not have chivalry in this world anymore? There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what? I'd love for a man to come scoop me up and provide for me.
Noting that it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a faithful remake or a complete deconstruction. The much-discussed changes to the story, including the removal of the central romance and the reimagined dwarfs, were widely panned as awkward and unnecessary. Zegler's performance drew mixed reactions. While no one doubted her talent, many critics felt her portrayal lacked the warmth and innocence that defined the animated Snow White. The film's attempts at feminist messaging were criticized as heavy-handed and unearned, especially coming from a studio with Disney's problematic history regarding female characters.
And you're so out of touch. You've never probably even spoken to a farmer or a rancher. You don't know any people to speak up who have issues filling up their tank. You've just been living in Hollywood, La La Land for so long.
The fallout was immediate and severe. Within weeks of the film's release, rumors began circulating that Disney was quietly distancing itself from Zegler. Projects she had been attached to, including potential roles in the Pirates of the Caribbean and Toy Story franchises, were reportedly reconsidered. The studio's stock took a noticeable dip as investors questioned the viability of Disney's remake strategy. Perhaps most damaging was the cultural conversation that emerged around the film's failure, with commentators across the political spectrum using Snow White as evidence of everything wrong with modern Hollywood, from woke storytelling to out-of-touch executives.
Trump wins, and Rachel decides to go on really just a psychopathic, demented rant, basically accusing all Trump supporters of being awful people, which is par for the course. I'm okay with that. But then she wished harm on Trump and all of his supporters for the next years to come.
Disney's response to the disaster was telling. Rather than defending the creative choices made in Snow White, the company quickly shifted focus to other projects. The planned Snow White theme park tie-ins were scaled back significantly, and references to the film disappeared from Disney's marketing materials. Industry observers noted that this marked a potential turning point for the studio's live-action remake strategy, which had already been showing diminishing returns before this spectacular failure. The Snow White debacle raises important questions about the current state of big-budget filmmaking. At its core, the film's failure represents a fundamental misunderstanding of why audiences connect with these classic stories. Disney's animated Snow White succeeded not because of its plot specifics, but because it captured a timeless fairy tale quality that resonated across generations. The 2024 version, by contrast, seemed embarrassed by its source
I
material.
just wanted to go on this little baby rant about Rachel Zegler, Disney's worst investment ever in the history of Disney investments.
Treating the original story as something that needed to be fixed rather than celebrated. Rachel Zegler's role in this failure shouldn't be overstated, but it also can't be ignored. Her pre-release comments set a negative tone that the film never recovered from, and her social media presence became a distraction from the actual product. However, the larger blame lies with Disney's creative leadership, who greenlit a fundamentally confused adaptation and then doubled down on controversial choices even as warning signs mounted. In the aftermath, both Zegler and Disney faced difficult paths forward. For the young actress, the challenge will be rehabilitating her public image and proving she can carry a film without becoming mired in controversy.
I find myself speechless in the midst of this. Another 4 years of hatred, leaning us towards a world I do not want to live in, leaning us towards a world that will be hard to raise my daughter in. P.S. She has no daughter.
For Disney, the questions are even bigger. How to regain audience trust, whether to continue with their remake strategy, and how to balance modern sensibilities with the timeless storytelling that built their empire. The failure of Snow White may ultimately be remembered as the moment Hollywood's remake bubble finally burst. After years of diminishing returns on nostalgia-driven projects, audiences have made it clear they want more than just familiar titles with contemporary political gloss. They want authentic storytelling that respects source material while finding ways to make it meaningful for new generations. Whether Disney or any other studio learns this lesson remains to be seen. What makes the Snow White disaster particularly noteworthy is how preventable it was.
Do you want to be Snow White or do you hate Snow White? Do you want to destroy Snow White? They went way too woke. They ended up kind of changing the whole movie. And
With a more respectful approach to the source material, more thoughtful handling of the publicity campaign, and more consideration for what audiences actually want from these remakes, this could have been another routine Disney release. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about hubris, creative confusion, and the dangers of alienating your core audience. As the dust settles, the film industry will be studying this case for years to come. The numbers don't lie. 270 million spent, over.
Snow White, budget $250 million, box office $43 million. Oh, but it's only been 2 days, give it a chance. No, I'm not gonna give it a chance. I'm not even talking about that number. Because like all the flops are unsurprising at this point.
300 million lost and incalculable damage to multiple careers and reputations. In the end, Snow White 2024 may be remembered not for its story, but for what its failure revealed about the current state of Hollywood. An industry struggling to balance artistic ambition, corporate demands, and audience expectations in an increasingly fragmented cultural landscape. The most tragic aspect of this whole saga is that Snow White herself, the innocent, kind-hearted character at the center of it all, became collateral damage in a battle she never asked for. Perhaps there's a lesson there about what happens when studios lose sight of the heart that makes these stories endure. After all, as the original film taught us, true magic comes from authenticity, not from forced reinvention. In their rush to modernize Snow White, Disney forgot the very qualities that made her timeless in the first place.